Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going deep on something that I think is super fascinating, and that's the Cinderella story,
Oh, yeah.
especially in sports.
Definitely classics.
I think everyone kind of have this idea of what a Cinderella story is, but you're listening to this, you want to go a little bit deeper than just surface level and really understand the
Mhm,
substance.
absolutely.
And so we're going to be going deep on some excerpts from an article titled "The Ultimate Cinderella Story: Which Underdog Can Shock the World, March Madness and Beyond."
Catchy title.
Yeah, so we're going to try to distill, I guess, what exactly makes a Cinderella story, and then look at some potential Cinderellas this year in sports, and just understand why these stories have such a powerful, effect on us.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool area where sports and storytelling really intersect. And one thing that stood out to me right away from the article was that it's not just any upset that qualifies,
Oh, wow.
It really highlights how these stories are about these huge upsets.
Huh. Okay, so let's dig into that then. What transforms a team or athlete into a Cinderella? The article makes it clear it's not just about an upset.
Right.
It's about overcoming what seem like insurmountable odds.
Yeah, it's about really shattering expectations.
Yeah. Especially when nobody believes in you.
Exactly. Like when everyone's counting you out, and that's what makes it so magical.
It makes you think about, what allows a team or an athlete facing those kinds of odds
Yeah.
to actually achieve the impossible.
Right.
Um, and they actually give a couple of examples in the article, and one of them is Leicester City winning the Premier League in 2016,
Oh, yeah.
which, is a total shock. And the odds were something like 5,000 to 1.
Yeah. It wasn't just unlikely, it was almost statistically impossible.
Right. And then they also talk about St. Peter's and their run to the Elite Eight in the 2022 NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that was incredible for a small school like that to go up against the giants of college basketball.
Totally. And so, what is it about those examples that really elevates them beyond just a simple upset?
I think it's that transformation from disbelief to belief. You start to see it in the team themselves, and then it spreads to the fans and the media.
Oh, interesting.
Like with Leicester, at first people were like, oh, it's a fluke. And then they kept winning, and people started to think, maybe there's something more here. And then it turned into this like total admiration.
Oh,
And with St. Peter's, it was the same thing. Each win just made it feel more and more like the impossible was happening. And as the article says, it really speaks to something deep in us, like we love to see the underdog win.
yeah.
It reminds us that anything is possible.
So now we know what creates this Cinderella magic, but now we have to ask who's going to be the next Cinderella.
Right. That's the million-dollar question.
The article, gives us some clues to look out for. It looks at lots of different sports and tries to, predict. But that's always risky, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's part of the fun.
Yeah, totally. So in college basketball, for example, they talk about teams with heart hustle and maybe one star player who can really, be a game changer.
Yeah, that's definitely a classic recipe for a March Madness upset.
Makes sense. And in soccer, they talk about these dark horse teams in the big tournaments like the World Cup.
Yeah, teams with young talent or maybe a really clever system that other teams haven't quite figured out yet.
Interesting. And they say don't forget about individual sports.
Right, like a young tennis player coming out of nowhere and beating a legend or a boxer who upsets the champ.
It really gets you thinking, like, are there any teams or athletes right now who fit that description?
Right.
I mean, I was thinking about maybe host mentions one, two very briefly named hypothetical teams that align with the vague description from the outline, even if the actual source isn't available.
Interesting.
Who knows? Maybe they have a shot.
I guess we'll see.
And of course, you can't talk about Cinderella stories without talking about March Madness.
Oh, yeah, March Madness is like the perfect stage for a Cinderella story.
Totally, because it's single elimination,
Yeah.
one loss and you're out.
Exactly. It makes every game so much more intense, and, upsets can happen so easily.
The article talks about UMBC beating Virginia as a 16 seed.
Oh.
The first time that's ever happened in the history of the tournament.
And it wasn't even close.
No, it was a total blowout.
Talk about rewriting the script.
It was amazing. And then there's Florida Gulf Coast University, Dunk City back in 2013.
Oh, yeah. They were so much fun to watch.
They played with so much energy and made it all the way to the Sweet 16.
It was inspiring to see a team like that just come out of nowhere and steal the show.
What I loved about them was that they weren't afraid of anyone.
Right. They just played their game and had fun doing it.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of March Madness.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen.
Right. Any team can beat any team on any given day.
So It's obvious that we love these underdog stories, but why is that?
Yeah, what is it about them that makes them so appealing?
The article talks about the psychology of the underdog and how it connects to our own experiences.
Yeah, most people have felt like an underdog at some point in their lives. And so when we see someone overcome those odds and achieve something amazing, it gives us hope.
Like it makes us believe that we can do it too.
Exactly. And the article talks about the power of the narrative, the stories of these underdogs, their grit, their determination, their belief that they can do anything.
Yeah, it's not just about the final score. It's about the journey.
And we love a good comeback story.
I do. We really do. And, speaking of predictions,
Oh, yeah.
the article actually makes a bold prediction for this year. They say, host speaker subtly gestures as if reading, but doesn't explicitly state a prediction, acknowledging the placeholder in the outline.
That's a long shot for sure.
Oh, definitely. But that's what makes a Cinderella story so great, right?
Exactly. If we knew it was going to happen, it wouldn't be as exciting.
It's that element of surprise that keeps us on the edge of our seats.
And, it reminds us that in sports, anything is possible.
So just to recap, a true Cinderella story is about overcoming the odds, capturing our hearts, and giving us hope.
Yeah. And I think after this deep dive, you have a much better understanding of what makes these stories so special.
For sure. They're more than just lucky breaks. It's a combination of factors that come together to create these really inspiring moments.
Right. And these moments stay with us long after the game is over.
They really do. And I think, one thing to think about is, have you ever witnessed an underdog victory?
In any field, not just sports.
Yeah. And what made that moment so special for you? What emotions did you feel?
Or you could even think about who are the underdogs right now who might be on the verge of a breakthrough.
Yeah, great question.
What are the signs that we should be looking for?
That's definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And we'll catch you next time.
See you later.
Bye.